You're listening to the Massage Therapist Development Initiative. I'm Jamie Johnston.
And I am Eric Purvis. This is a podcast by massage therapists for massage therapists.
Our objective is to simplify how to be a more evidence-informed practitioner. Let's dig into this episode. We are back with another episode on the podcast for the Massage Therapist Development Initiative. And this one's pretty special because this is the first time we've had a guest on. So today we invite Matt Phillips, who's joining us from the UK. Matt's got some great stuff going on. He runs something called RunChat Live because he's a massage therapist who does a lot of work with runners and focuses on running. And he also runs another podcast through the Sport Therapy Association in the UK, and he's doing some great work with that. So Matt, welcome to being the first guest on our podcast.
You sprung that on me. Now I feel shaky. Now my hands are shaking. I didn't realize that. But looking back, yeah, I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I've just realized myself. Yes, so thank you. I'm even more honored than I was beforehand. So I appreciate it.
We were having a little chat before we came live here, how impressed we are with your beard. So we'll see if we can all work towards
to see it today.
Oh, yeah, we're recording this as a video. We'll have it up.
Oh, that's okay then. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we want that. We want everybody to see that handsome face.
Yeah, these also go on YouTube as well. Yeah.
So flattering. Okay.
We'll have you everywhere, buddy. Yeah, we'll have you everywhere.
My imposter syndrome has disappeared now. I feel great.
Good. Perfect. So I think, interestingly enough, is you had me on your podcast a few weeks ago there, and you posed a question at me before we got on about what my opinions were about evidence-based practice as opposed to evidence-informed practice. So that kind of spurred me on to look at some research, and I wrote a blog post on it, which spurred a lot of conversation over here in Canada. And I actually thank you for doing that because I had never thought of it before. And I think we're better now that I've looked at it to be evidence-informed therapists. So what got you so motivated to spread the word about evidence-informed practice?
That's really good. I saw that blog first of all, and it's great. And I mentioned it to a few other people. I was speaking to Rachel Zoffness, who I don't know if you're familiar with the work. She's a pain psychologist, yeah. And she had the same kind of idea as you, which I liked. So as always with this communication, I took something from you because I love the idea where you kind of suggested evidence-based means your foundation is the evidence, and then you kind of build on that, which is essentially what evidence-informed means. It just means you don't go just by the quantitative studies, which don't know who's in front of you. You know, you can't do that because unless your person in front of you is part of their sample population, it means very little. So I think your definition, what you were working to of evidence-based, the same way as Rachel's and probably a few other people, was totally accurate. I think the conclusion of the BJSM paper was that it's probably more a case of how you do things rather than the name you give it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a useful distinction to make because we are living in a very polar kind of society where people are like, I'm evidence-based and I don't believe in anything that involves touching people. And the other people are like, well, I do everything which is touching people because you lot are just a bunch of scientists and science doesn't know everything. And it's just, we don't get anywhere. So sometimes I think evidence-informed is a useful way. And it's what I've been using for the last kind of year. I can't remember who got me onto it. Maybe it was that paper, but it kind of reminds me that I mustn't be too kind of science-based and too skeptical and throw everything out, because part of the evidence is what the client in front of us actually believes in and wants and expects. That's going to make them better quicker. So it's, what got me onto it? I think just being old. I think just getting into the industry a long time ago. I think just seeing a lot of fads, seeing the whole myofascial thing kind of start in 2000, getting everybody onto Fitball to kind of activate their intrinsic muscles before we went on to a kind of proper bench press and the whole foam roller thing and all of that. I was with NASM back in around 2002 or something. I did their course. They were linked to the gym chain I was working with. I went over actually to California to check the guys out there with the idea of maybe doing some work there. But didn't in the end. But it was like a chance to see your beautiful country, and that was great because for a while in 2003, I felt I was like a Paul Chet style guru who knew everything by doing this whole integrated approach and looking at things. Especially, it was very much based around the whole multifidus and activating that before you do everything else. And I think most people at the time were totally into it, and we felt like kings. And then slowly, I kind of started seeing other things evolve and watch that not totally disappear, but become less. Even the original authors of the paper kind of started saying, well, we might have been overemphasizing a little bit about what goes on around the core. We don't like using the word core so much. So that, together with quite a few other fads that I've seen in my time since being in the strength and conditioning community, made me think, geez, you've got to take everything with a pinch of salt. You can't jump on a soapbox too quickly, because even the people who write these things soon realize that they can change their mind, but it's too late because the DVD's already out. Another one was the famous fuzz video with Gil Headley, where he was talking about the whole kind of, oh, look at this, and the fuzz, and it solidifies. And he was such an enigmatic person. And that kind of sparked the whole, pretty much the whole fascia kind of incorporation of that into all the courses. And then years later, he goes, oh, I've just realized this only really works if the person in front of you is dead. A bit too late for all the DVDs which had gone out, and said, right, we've got to do this because otherwise the gel solidifies. You've got to put your fingers on it and make it kind of soft stay. And it was too late. It was in all of these level 5 massage qualifications. So I think essentially it's a combination of being old, which isn't always a good thing, because there's a load of old therapists out there who are guilty of not changing their ways. Yeah. But I've always probably just felt like I have to question myself, which has been for good and bad. Sometimes it can give you massive imposter syndrome, which we've talked about a lot with other therapists, but at least it makes me happy just to realize, oh, right, well, that's changed now. Evolve, that goes with it. But I think it's something that a lot of therapists maybe aren't born with, or, and if you're not, then it can make life very, very difficult. And you can either doubt yourself and give up, or you can just stick your heels in and just keep spouting out stuff, which maybe isn't quite so true as it was yesterday.
Yeah, it's true. And we quite often talk about, we're always just trying to be just a little less wrong as we go.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's lovely. But that sounds so defeated to so many people. I've tried that with therapists. Like you should always let the patient come out with their own analogies and metaphors. I think it's with therapists as well, because some therapists take that on board and they go, that's a beautiful way of looking at things. That's changed everything. Other therapists will go, oh yeah, I'm going to base all my career on just being a bit less wrong, Matt. That's just ridiculous. And so it doesn't always work. But for us, I think that sums it up.
Yeah, well, I think it creates, I think too, the thing is what you have, right, is you have people that they hold on to these ideas, and these ideas that's their identity. And so when you challenge that idea of like, whatever, maybe you're a fascial therapist and you think that's what you're doing, and then you're like, try and be less wrong with that. Well, then who are you? And I think that's something that we encounter all the time. And Jamie and I've been teaching together for a number of years, and we always see that is that people have to reform their new identity to being, oh, I'm not this specific tissue or modality therapist. I am now a least wrong, evidence-informed therapist. And that doesn't sound nearly as sexy and exciting as someone that's correcting problems. And I think, we're speaking to the converted here, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that not everybody thinks the way we do, and that's probably a good thing in some ways.
I think it's definitely the biggest challenge. I don't know why they don't. That's the most difficult thing.
Yeah,
like, I haven't quite put my finger on it yet. I don't get it, and it makes me feel guilty of thinking, maybe we're the minority and we're all wrong. How are we going to help the problem if we don't understand why they feel like they do, sort of thing?
That's how I felt for a long time. I felt like I'm the crazy one. I felt like, well, why am I the only one saying this? Or why is there so few of us thinking this way or seeing things this way? And then you feel crazy. And then you're like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe pain science and maybe evidence is a fad. Maybe it's a thing that is going to be thrown out the window. And I think as time goes by, you realize, well, no, that's a better explanation than the other stuff that we've been indoctrinated with.
Yeah, well, and I think that's part of the issue too, is because we get indoctrinated with things, right? We go through college, and I know that when I went through, I just took everything verbatim from the teachers, because I was like, well, they're the teachers, so they must be telling me exactly what's right. And then a couple of years down the road, you're going, wait a minute, most of that stuff's not right. But I think we're not taught to critically look at things. We're not taught to critically think and pull things apart. So I think that in turn is probably part of the reason why not everybody thinks the same way.
And I think I've got to take my hat off. I mean, as always, standing on the shoulders of giants, I have to, maybe it's the people who you kind of come across when you're looking for stuff, and that may be just pot luck. But once I found, for example, Paul Ingraham, and I found Greg Lehman and other people, Todd Hargreave and Paul Ingram and people like that, and Diane Jacobs, and then later Jason Silvernail, and obviously Mosley and Butler, they all came together so much, probably gave me a lot of confirmation bias, but I feel it's quite quite a healthy confirmation bias, because the message from that confirmation bias was it's okay to be wrong and question yourself. And, you know, you'd never know everything black and white. I could easily have fallen upon other gurus who are still about and around and totally got sucked into them. So I may be just as guilty as other people in the sense of who you find and who you like, who rings your bells, you crack on with, and that's who you believe for a long time.
Yeah, I'd say it's the same probably for both of us as well. You know, we quite often, well, every time that we teach, we talk about the people who have influenced us and helped us get to the point that we are. Like you said, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, and you know, lots of the people that you named were influential to us. And then we've got the Corey Blickenstaffs and Ben Cormacks and Bronnie Thompsons and Keith Meldrums and different people like that that have helped us out. So yeah, I love that point. So let's get into what you're probably best known for, is running and helping people who are runners. So what do you see as the most common injuries and ways that a massage therapist can help runners? Like what do you think is the most common issues that they're coming in for?
I think the reason why maybe I've stuck at it for so long is I think the running population, I was talking about this the other day with somebody, is a really interesting population to look at when you're looking at pain science and modern concepts and expectations and beliefs, because out of all sports, runners have probably got the most kind of distorted beliefs when it comes to avoiding injury, managing injury, and even increasing performance. It's really distorted because it's an area which has got such little knowledge. We're only realizing now really ultimately it depends on the individual. So the biomechanics, a lot of that becomes so difficult. Everything becomes difficult. The footwear, the way you run, everything is very much depends on the individual. But since the 80s, when the industry's been actually looking into solutions for various problems, the incidence hasn't come down because there's such a void of knowledge. It's been filled very quickly with anything else which can fill the gaps, which isn't really the way it's supposed to go. But the industry's exploded. The whole pronation, for example, way of prescribing footwear. That's even now on one or two major footwear kind of specialists on their websites. It still talks about urinova pronation. It still uses the word. Other sites are taking it off, but that's like probably a good 15 years, 20 years maybe since Ben O'Neill started saying, well, look, actually this paradigm doesn't really work. And definitely a good 15 years since other people like Ian Griffiths have been writing, and just Simon Bartels and JF Ascoulis. There's so many people out there. And that's what pushes me on, because runners don't get to hear these people. In our little bubble of therapists and social media, we all know now that the whole overpronation thing is a word we probably shouldn't even use. But then runners are still en masse. I go into 12,000 member groups saying, oh yeah, if you're an overpronator, you need to buy this shoe. So that's always been the challenge for me. And when it comes to massage, which I totally love and adore and teach, and I was fortunate enough, I think, to start with kind of Swedish massage, which was all about I remember my teacher at the time was fantastic, talking about close your eyes and just get into the rhythm yourself. And the more you get into the state of just relaxation, forget about your client for a moment, just do you enjoy every single stroke and take pleasure in what you're feeling and everything, that will then reciprocate to the person underneath. You know, it was a real kind of, at the time, it's always a little bit hippie. I think, well, we even did it in a little kind of wigwam in the middle of a forest in the south of England somewhere. But I'm very thankful for that, because we know that massage works on that level. And what used to be called a bit hippie and holistic is actually being shown now in studies that it is the relationship we have with the person, the nervous system. It can do fantastic things with depression and anxiety. So for me, what spurs me on with runners are a great example of where they go to a massage therapist to get fixed. They think that knots are going to be broken down. They think the circulation is going to be improved. They think it's going to reduce DOMS. All of these kind of misconceptions which have been created in the absence of knowing why massage works. And as usual now, the research is showing, or has done for a little bit of time now, that massage really is doing is affecting the nervous system. Again, we've got these hurdles now of breaking down the kind of structuralism from runners' minds, which is a tricky, but that's what spurs me on, what I like with runners. So anything runners come in for, they think, lie down on the couch. They're on the couch before you even say get on the couch, and they just think you're going to rub them better. And that's cuts my work out for me for at least another 5 years, I think, or 10 years probably.
So what are the most common things that they're coming in for? Is there like, you always hear about shin splints or these kind of things? is that something that we need to dispel when talking to them?
You know what's really interesting? One thing I like to point out is normally runners will come in and just say, I can't run, my leg hurts. I'm I can't run more. Normally they don't come in with any of these terms. Normally it's the fault of the therapist who will then give them something like, oh yeah, let me have a look, diagnose. Oh yeah, it's ITB syndrome, or your glutes aren't firing, or even, yeah, a lot of therapists still use the umbrella term like shin splints or plantar fasciitis. So the runner really comes in as a human being, with their whole biopsychosocial thing working in front of you. And it's us, the therapist, who then diagnoses it as part of their body, which isn't working and doing this. So that's why I think really a lot of it has to change on the therapist level. So yeah, most runners will come in with that. If they've been to a few therapists, then they start coming in. Oh yeah, I know what it is. I've got my plantar fasciitis is playing up again. And straight away, the therapist has got to unpeel that and start thinking, okay, well, now you think it's your plantar fasciitis and you've told you've got degradation or something of tissues in your fatty pads, but I'm interested to hear what you put down that you only sleep 3 hours a night, because you've got a screaming baby and your wife is a nurse and she has to work at night and you have to look after the baby and feed it. Can we talk about that a little bit rather than just saying you've got plantar fasciitis? And that's what's so exciting, I think, about massage therapists is runners, regardless of what's happening to them, a lot of the time they will come to us because they're in pain and they believe that we can rub their pain away. So they're the first ones through the door. So we've got a fantastic opportunity to actually educate and still make them feel better, but not keep that perpetuated belief that we're actually fixing them with our hands. So I'm not going to name one particular injury because they all walk through the door in the same way. I mean, if you look at the research, it'll say that there's knee injuries and there's calf injuries and Achilles injuries, and then later on the hip and that. But I think it's useful and something I've been trying to do for the last year or so of talking just the language which the runners have and getting rid of this whole kind of diagnosis. And these are the most popular injuries in runners. And because they're not interested in all of that, they just want to be able to run better and not be in pain. And that's a good page to be on rather than going down what are the most common injuries. Does that make sense? I think I've just avoided your question fantastically, but there is a reason behind it.
I think you make some good points there, Matt, because I think what happens when someone comes in and they have pain in an area, they're coming in because they hurt. I hurt and it's stopping me from running. I don't think patients really need to know, like they don't need a diagnosis. They just want to run. But I think in order to and we, like the global we of healthcare providers and massage therapists, which we are, so let's pick on us, is that we seem to almost need to validate the reason why they're hurting. So we make up something. And then by doing that, and I loved how you said, let's talk about, you're sleeping 3 hours a night, you got a kid, because like when you just say you have plantar fasciitis, you're dismissing like the human and their experience of like everything else that's going on in their life. The only reason you hurt is because you've got this tissue problem. Well, is that it? Like, how can we, why do we need to diagnose that? Why do we need to like put a label on it? And I love what you said there, because I think that's a big problem is that this desire for us to create something so we have something to fix, so we can validate why they're coming, rather than just like, how about we just work on making them feel good? Because isn't that what people want?
I can't remember who said it first, but we've got that whole thing, it pays to pathologize. And that's not kind of like, hasn't got to be totally cynical, but I think that's what the courses show. They teach us that our skill is what we're going to do to that person when we've diagnosed what they've got. Do your objective, work out what it is, and then bam, and you go with your skills. And that's the problem. We need to change our industry. So we're not paying to pathologize, we're paying to listen, to show empathy, to understand, look at the human being and all that sort of stuff, and use what we do know to make them better. But it's tricky. There's a lot of stuff to undo.
That's brilliant. That's the first time I've heard that it pays to pathologize.
I can't remember, it wasn't me. I can't remember. I can't remember who it was on.
I'm giving credit to you.
I think that's what we all do, right? We all just kind of steal other people's stuff and reframe it and be like, I don't know where I got this from, but someone told this to me and it sounds really smart. So
I'm gonna have to look it up on my phone now and give them credit. I can't have anyone thinking it was me.
I'll be putting a quote up on Facebook later dedicated to you on that one. So.
Don't do that. I can't remember who it was.
Because there was another thing too that I've heard before is very similar, was that what's good for healthcare isn't good for your bank account, which is similar.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I've really been trying the last year And it's thanks to the shouters on social media who I thank the people who type in capital letters and kind of like are on that polar side, even though I appreciate them for teaching me stuff, but it also teaches me to be less kind of one-sided. And I appreciate it's really difficult to understand. I think COVID showed me that a lot of therapists really suffer. In fact, the more they believe the hands are the solution, the more they've suffered because they really feel they can't help their patients at all. And it's been a real eye opener for them. And a lot have just gone out of business. So I think it's a real time that we have to kind of be patient and understand that the therapists in front of us, as well as the patients, have got their own lives and their own problems, and their belief systems are based on that. And I think it's happening because of COVID, but we're in the UK, we're tending to be a little bit nicer to each other, and we're crossing boundaries and chatting about things instead of saying, oh, you're not evidence-based and all that. So, you know, it's easy to imagine that all people who kind of diagnose are just trying to make a quick buck about it, saying, oh, you need to come in for 8 sessions, but don't worry, we do 10 for the price of 8 if you sign here, thank you very much, you know, without even knowing what it is. But I don't think all of them are real guilty of just doing that in bad intent. I really believe that anybody who wants to spend their life earning not much money rubbing oil into a hairy guy's back is has got a good heart. You know, that they're fairly altruistic, otherwise they would have been a lawyer or a doctor or something which would guarantee them some more money.
And we quite often talk about that too, you know, we're talking about the words that we use and the language that we use, and you know, we always say that these are coming from very well-meaning practitioners. We don't believe that there's a practitioner out there that's like, I'm going to say these things so that I make sure this person's in for 10 more visits so that I make $1,000 off them. They're doing what they believe will help, and they're doing what they believe they should in order to help these people. It's just that they haven't updated their knowledge or updated their language to what hopefully it should be.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because even now I'm hearing you say that and thinking, but I know loads of business models who work it out in the background when all the patients are left and they're with their laptop. Right, every single patient I've got a guarantee comes in for at least 6 visits. Okay, how many patients have not come in for 6 visits? It's a business model, you know, and it's helping these business people, which is why in England there's a lot over that on now business. The CPD has moved more toward healthy business, but getting away from that idea of every patient in for 6 times, regardless of what it is, there's always a way of getting them back. Because some patients, you've got to just say, you know what, you're fine. If you need me, then fine, I'm here. But you know what would help you most of all is just crack on with this yourself and have confidence in your body. You know, you're more robust than you think. And that's really going to help them rather than telling them they need to come back another 5 times, you know. So it's tricky.
Yeah, over the last number of years, I've gone from recommending they come back for 5 visits like I did early in my career to be, when do you think you need to come back? How do you feel? When do you think you need to come in? I feel like I need to come back in 2 weeks. Okay, come back in 2 weeks then. And let's see how you're doing. Put the ball in there. That's really
nice. Yeah. I was guilty not so long ago. Actually, as I was too evidence-based, just saying people, look, you don't need to come back. Go away. Leave me alone. And then wondering why I'm sitting in an empty clinic. And kind of like the clinic manager's going, Matt, you've got less clients than anybody. What's going on? Oh, well, I'm evidence-based. Yeah, but you're not making any money, mate. You know, it's like, and a lot of the people I was turning away, they wanted to come back. They needed me. They weren't going to do their exercises by themselves. You know, they were happy to pay to come in, have their hand held for a while. And I was actually letting them down by not letting them say that to me, you know, so, but it comes with experience.
Yes. And it takes a while to get that experience. So.
And I think a really important thing, just to jump in on this topic, because I think it's a really important topic to understand, is that if you're super evidence-based, you just want to get rid of people because you want them to be totally managing themselves. But if we, you know, but you also don't want to pathologize them, so they need you. So there's always like, how do you find that middle ground? And I found over the years, like trying to, like, you know, because I've done both. Like I've been, let's get you to come in all the time, and let's go away, never come see me again, because, you know, I'm so evidence-based, I do nothing, you do everything, right? And then so it's like, how do you find that middle ground? And this goes to the concept that we talked about before, about supportive self-management. How do you get that person to come in so that they are there because they want you and they're helping you? And like you said, Matt, they're, you know, that maybe that's what's needed for them to do their exercises, or for them to or for just them to kind of keep them on their plan. And maybe they just have to check in periodically. And I think I like that idea. And I find that works really well, at least in my practice, where people sometimes like, well, can I come see you? Like, well, of course you can come see me, but as long as you know that you don't have to, you know, we kind of have that understanding, and it tends to work really well.
Yeah, I love that. We were teaching on the weekend, and I think that was the first time I heard that Keith Meldrum was having a chat with us, and he brought up that supported self-care. And I think the more that we could push for that, which I know is going to be hard for insurance companies to accept, but the more that we can push that, sometimes people still need to come in because they need a bit of support to get them to that next level, but we're still promoting their self-care and still promoting that they're doing things on their own and giving them the tools that they need in order to accomplish that, but they just may need a little support along the way. I thought was great. Okay, so at least one other thing I'd like to get into, and this is funny because it came up in a group chat with some friends the other day, where one of our friends who's a massage therapist said that his physio was out in the hallway doing a gait analysis with one of the patients. So how do you see things like that? Because we always preach that biomechanics are important when they're important. And we talk about, like, when high level athlete, for instance, when I'm working in hockey, their stride and those kind of things are very important to being effective as an athlete. But then we've got, like, the weekend warrior hockey player that comes in. I'm not as concerned about the biomechanics of their stride. So how do you see that with when it comes to helping runners?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, gait analysis. And again, I just need to admit that, like 10 years ago, we were one of the first companies probably to start doing gait analysis in the South Coast before shoe shops started doing it. And we did really well. And then shoe shops opened up and people were saying, oh, you're going to be out of business now. The shoe shops are doing this. And we actually ended up doing better, because as soon as the shoe shop started doing it, we started looking more in detail what they were saying with the whole overpronation stuff, and I started looking it up a bit more. And it was thanks to that we actually realized, hold on, what we're saying here, what we're kind of looking for here isn't quite there. So again, I only know what I do today thanks to getting it wrong and saying the wrong things beforehand. So I know it is difficult for therapists to have to kind of sometimes just feels like do a whole 360 turn. But yeah, gait analysis for runners is really interesting, because I've just done a kind of I'm doing a bunch of 12-minute videos on my website, like a runner's guide, and gait analysis. I actually ended up doing 3 parts of it. Wasn't the idea, but it incorporates so much of moving forwards with the evidence, because the biomechanics for gait analysis is all over the place. There's nothing really that it gives us a few things we can play around with. But as soon as you read a paper, for example, that suggests that, let's say, widening the width of your stance by 3 centimeters takes strain off the ITB and can help with kind of lateral hip pain or distal pain on the lateral knee, then that's great. We can try that, but we have to realize that there's other papers equally as good by esteemed authors who show that there was no relationship between crossover and that. So we can look at the evidence, and basically it just gives us we can try this. We can try speeding up cadence to try and take pain away from anterior knee or something. But then we have to be aware that there's plenty of runners who are running with too high a cadence, or that cadence isn't going to be the same for everybody. So at the moment, all we've really got is a kind of a palette of colors. And we can start kind of painting a little picture using bits and bobs here and testing it out. But you've got to be really confident in yourself to do that, because the attraction of biomechanics is huge. And any course which is selling biomechanics, they're going to paint it up like a screening type thing, where these are the rules, look for this is going to be that, because that's how it sells. But it's nowhere. It's not something we can offer. Someone comes in and says, right, can you look at my running and tell me how I can run better, or how I can reduce risk of injury? It's a very gray area. And if you're charging someone 2 hours to do that without saying, we could try this, it's tricky though. It's a bit dodgy. Where we can help is we know how to offload tissues. So thanks to the research, if someone does come in pain, then that gives us a much healthier palette to work from. So we can play around with changing cadence. We can play around with if we do see a crossover in their gait, or if we see a lateral tilt of some form, because that's been linked as well with ITB problems, or we can change the load. But it's really healthy to let the runner know in front of us, look, we can change your running form, we can change this load, but the load's going to go somewhere else. And that's something I think where a lot of biomechanics fall short on. So you can make someone run on, someone comes in with some heel pain or something, and you go, oh, that's fine, we should be running midfoot anyway, or forefoot. Then you can say that if you want, and it might work for a while, but you've got to be conscious that that just means the load's now going to go onto their calves and their Achilles. So you can't get rid of it. So as soon as you tweak something, then something else is going to start taking the brunt of that load. So I love it when people come in pain. because I think that if you're running a certain way, you could be stopping recovery from happening. I see a lot of people have been told chronic conditions of 3-4 years where they've been told by specialists, by consultants, you shouldn't be running, you need these injections, or you need this new plasma thing, it's going to cost you loads of money. And I've just gone through the basics of how they're running it and looked at them and gone, well, look, according to the research, if you're going out and running like this, it's equivalent to just picking your scab. It's never going to heal. And we just put them on a little bit of a gait retraining program with some strengthening to go with it so they can sustain the new way of running. And honestly, hand on heart, although it's anecdotal and I'm contradicting to myself, often it does miracles, because the body, the nervous system doesn't recover until it's happy to do the activity you're trying to get it to do without feeling threatened. So you don't recover until that's done. So with runners, until they can run pain-free, the nervous system is always going to be context-based and go, forget it. You've done a mile running or you've done half a mile, pain, pain, pain. So I love gait analysis for that. That's the biggest thing that I do. But in terms of helping someone just improve performance, that's very tricky. You know, and I think there's a bit of hypocrisy out there, because you talk to anybody and they'll go, oh no, the biggest rule is if it ain't broken, don't fix it. And then you're thinking, well, I'd love to actually be a fly on your wall in your gait analysis lab, because when people come in saying, I just want to run fast, I want to get my 5K, I bet you're telling them things which, you know, so yeah, I don't know if that's answered your question, but I love it. But I think it's a tool that can be used disastrously as well and cause runners to waste a lot of money and detract their attention from something else they should be looking at.
Yeah. So there's a time and a place.
Definitely. I mean, in my pyramid, I always kind of talk about in presentations of a pyramid of addressing things, especially for runners in pain. And you've got to look at the foundation, which for me would be the capacity, the strength. So the kind of balance of load. So are you just doing too much your body can handle? So we've got a choice here. We can reduce what you're doing, or we can try and make you stronger, or maybe tweak the way you run so you can handle that capacity. And then after that, we might look at something like running form. After that, we might look at shoes. After that, we might start doing something else, you know, but it's always looking at that load and training habits. That's where the research takes us. 70 to 80% of running related injuries are down to, according to the Veljak study, are down to inappropriate training and loading. So that's what we need to look at first of all, and then we can start doing the fancy stuff after that.
That's such a good point too, Matt, because it's just, that's the most logical, right? We people tend to get hurt when they overtrain or they're deconditioned and they go too hard, too fast. I know myself being a runner and using, you know, being used to running a lot and doing, you know, racing and stuff, that the only time I would get injured would be when I overtrained and I kept pushing it every day, right? You're like too many hard runs in a week, or you're like, well, I'm going to do an extra track workout and there's a tweaked hamstring or a sore hip or whatever, right? So it all has to do with load. And I think that's such an important point to make, is that let's look at the basics and then worry about all the fancy stuff after if the basics isn't working. And I had a question actually for you, because this, I mean, you mentioned the concept of overpronation, and something I never really think about anymore, but where did that come from, of overpronation? Was there like a paper that was written a long time ago that everyone was just like, all people that are runners that are sore overpronate, so therefore we correct that? It's kind of like the core stuff got translated from, this is what we see with people with low back pain, so therefore we have to fix the core. You know, that people just take this data and then they take what they want from it. Are you familiar with anything similar with pronation?
Yeah, the furthest I can go back, and I'm not sure if it's 100% true, but what I did read was that it actually came from looking at footprints in snow in the military. So I think it was something which was used where you could tell whether it was your soldiers or the enemies by the print they left in the snow. And that's where they started looking at the kind of the depth of the medial arch and stuff to see whether it was, you know, your own troops or whether someone else had been going around during the nighttime in the snow. And somehow that idea of separating different footsteps into categories got put into, I think when the jogging guide, what it was called, came out in America in the 80s or something, or earlier, somehow it got incorporated as a way of fitting shoes according to the three types of footprints in the snow, which they found out. But the trouble is, the footprint you leave in the snow is going to be very different than, you know, what you're going to leave whilst you're running. And you can't divide all runners up into three categories. But it just boomed. It just boomed with the running craze and jogging and running, and became the staple way of assigning shoes out to people. And it just sold. I think that was the thing. It became part of a massive kind of money making industry, without, again, trying to sound too cynical. But whenever an idea is taken off, the main kind of thing behind it is how much money it's making, isn't it? So whether it's true or not. So that's where it came from, I think. Footprints in the snow.
That's so funny, because especially in that exact example, there's so many variables there. Like, how heavy a pack were they wearing? What kind of boots were they wearing? Are they used to walking in snow? Like, there's so many variables that could contribute to that it's just crazy that something would take off from there.
It's like
okay.
the other day I was talking about, I had a question about breathing, and there was, I don't like, I won't say who wrote the book actually, but there's a book out which was very famous, and it worked on a paper which basically was saying it was a paper to do with like locomotion and breathing and kind of rates of breathing. And it came out with this idea, the authors of this paper did, that if you're breathing, if you've got a stride, for example, you're breathing 2 steps in and 2 steps out, then you're always going to land on the same foot with the same rhythm. So if you're going in, out, then you're always starting off your routine on the same foot. And they kind of were talking about maybe this could cause an overstress. And they came up with the idea, maybe it would be kind of interesting to always make sure that your breathing to step ratio was odd. So you're doing like a 2 in, 3 out, because that way, when you do your little finger thing, it actually alternates. You end up starting on the left and then starting on the right. And they were just kind of talking about this. It fitted in with their paper where they were looking at humans and different mammals with regards to breathing. And it was very interesting because they were showing that the secret behind successful locomotion seems to be to have a rhythm and consistency. And they linked this in with the whole central governor theory of just your brain receiving consistent messages and CO2 intake, and therefore it was just relaxed and you could keep going. An author came out and published this and hit like, this is the way to run now, everyone, you've got to be running with an odd rhythm. And suddenly runners everywhere are saying, oh my God, it worked. It works for me. I've changed my rhythm to 2 breaths in and then 2 steps while I breathe in and 3 steps when I breathe out. And Runner's World picked up on it, and their book was kind of celebrated by them. And it was only once this book had exploded, and I apologize to anybody who's reading this book and doing it. And if it works for you, that's great. But this is another fantastic example of a case where the authors later on go, actually, we were just talking about it. Tell you the truth, it's really improbable. It can't happen really because of blah, blah, blah. But it was too late. And of course, when you tell people this is going to work for you, then we all know that, if you believe it's going to work, it's work. You don't know the people it hasn't worked for. But it happens so much throughout running where somebody will come along, a paper will come along, and they'll suggest something, and then suddenly it gets translated into courses and DVDs. And then the authors themselves come along and go, I've had a year to think about this now. And actually, you know what? No, this only works fascia if you're dead, for example, or, actually the core will always work when you stand up. You don't have to contract it, before you do anything. So it happens all the time, but the business gets in the way and the DVD comes out, and I think that's a big problem, particularly in the running industry.
I don't think it's just the running industry.
Wow.
But I'd like to circle back to something you said when you were talking about showing your patients when something changes, and you said, when we look at what the research says, it says this, and all the time when we're teaching courses, we have people that are like, well, how am I going to communicate this new information to my patients when for so long I've been telling them that their hip is out or their rib is out or their gait is off for running or whatever. And that's my favorite thing to say is, well, I just look at patients and say, well, the new research has actually shown us this. And 99% of the time, they just look and they're like, okay. And nobody really argues about it. So just loved hearing you say that, but would love to hear like kind of your experience with that as well, and how you maybe came across the change in language when you're talking to patients as opposed to maybe how you did 10 years ago.
I think it worked for a while, but I think the last year or so, and the reason why COVID's hanging around so much, I think, and how Trump got elected and Boris in our country, I think it's all part of this detachment that society feels from people in knowledge. There's this distrust of scientists and politicians, sadly, because everyone thinks the scientists are working for the politicians. I don't know how that came about, but and now, and also there's just the increase of trusting more your friends, like the whole TripAdvisor, or you look at ratings on Amazon from people, you don't read the blurb because everything's so much advertising now. So there is a distrust in science, I think, and it's been shown in the UK massively. Conspiracy theories have never had a better time to spread because as soon as a scientist comes out and says something, then something, conspiracy theory arises. But so I found that over the last year or so, particularly when I'm doing online consultations, that I'm not using well, the research says this, because I think it's a bit of a closed door for a lot of people, even subconsciously. I think there's such a distrust now in science because of the way social media just pushes, yes or no, rather than let's think about it. It doesn't do it, social media, that. So I've stopped using it as much as I can, unless I know the person I'm talking to is really geeky and they want to. So my favorite way has gone back to kind of old school of like just teaching, just education, of trying to elicit it from the person themselves, just giving them scenarios. It's nice. It's easier in person because that way I can just drop my pen and tell the person to pick it up, and then I'll do it again and again. And eventually when they're practically touching the floor, they'll go, I know what you're doing. I haven't got tight hamstrings, have I? And I'll go, exactly. We only have to do that 6 times. But I think that's the best way of learning, as long as they appreciate your sarcastic sense of humor. Yeah. If they reach that conclusion themselves, like runners who have been told they need 180 steps per minute, it still happens out there. They still read it a lot because Google chucks up the most popular stuff. Doesn't matter if it's from 2000 or whether it's from 2020. It's just the most hits will be up there. So I still get runners seeing me and they get on the treadmill and they're I try not to laugh at them. That's the most important thing when you're working with a client. But their legs are going around so fast. They're only traveling at like maybe 9 kph or something, but they're trying to maintain this cadence of going round and round. And sometimes I've actually been guilty of if I'm working with them for a while, I'll go out running with them and they'll be doing this cadence and I'll walk past them as fast as I can. And they'll look at me going, what are you doing? I said, well, look how fast your legs are moving. I've just walked past you. I said, what are you saying? I said, what do you think I'm saying? And eventually, if they can go, I don't need to be moving my legs around this fast. It's not really helping me, is it? And I'm going, exactly. I think that whenever I can do that, that opens up massive doors. But that's always been the way with education. It's the way you teach a foreign language, which was my kind of background as well. You let the person reach the conclusion themselves so they can work it out, because that's a far stronger kind of matrix moment of, yeah, I'll have that pill, please, rather than saying, oh, the research says this. So yeah, that's how I work. I try and use different examples, sometimes using, ridiculizing the patient in front of me, but I think it works. If they realize it themselves, then that helps open the doors. And once you've got that door open, then suddenly they'll listen to you. Because people love being taught. It's a beautiful thing, learning from someone you respect. You just got to somehow make sure the person in front of you, 1, trusts you, and 2, that you're not spouting out a load of rubbish, because that can be detrimental.
I think that's a really important point, Matt. And I love that having people come to their own conclusions about what is actually going on in their body is way more meaningful. I know early in my journey, I spent a lot of time talking at patients and I realized pretty quickly that didn't work very well. And so, but yeah, getting them to experience something that is different from what they expect, right? They have, I love that concept of expectancy violation, where they're expecting something to happen and it doesn't happen. And then you can draw attention to it. And then they're like, oh, I don't have tight hamstrings, or my back isn't that bad. I think that's a really important thing to make. And I think for us and, the people that are evidence informed or pain research curious or whatever, I think that's an important thing to understand, is that you can have all this knowledge, but your patient doesn't need to know that. I think it's important for us to know it, but it's more important for them to experience that change rather than for us to just talk at them and expecting that that's going to change them. I think I think that's an important thing that I'm glad you brought that up, because I think something to really emphasize it. I think Jim and I have probably talked about that before on this podcast a lot, about just like, yeah, it's good information to know, but your patient probably doesn't care too much. They just care how they feel.
Definitely. And it's a skill. It's I was chatting to Mike Stewart of No Pain, KNOW pain.co.uk, and he's a fantastic educator with regards to pain. He's been at San Diego Summit a few times, and he actually worked with Louis Gifford. He was down with Louis Gifford in Cornwall before Louis Gifford passed away. And he just reminds us all that if you're a therapist, the more we realize now that therapy is all about educating the person in front of you. Yeah, you're a teacher more than anything. And then he'll have a presentation where it's like 2,000 people presentation. Go, hands up in here, who's a therapist? Fine. Hands up, how many of you have actually done a teaching qualification? And it'll be like 1 or 2. And he goes, well, how are you supposed to go out and teach your patients and educate your patients? And that rings a lot of bells with therapists. You've got to do courses where you learn how to actually sit back and listen, or use questions which will elicit information, and open-ended questions and close-ended questions, and know how to step in, know how to dig your thumbnail into your finger to stop you from talking, even though you really want to say something, but you've got to let this patient, feel that they're being listened to, and summarize what the patient has said. So you're getting that kind of alliance. It's a skill which I think CPD falls a little bit short on. It's something which could really help therapists a lot, learning how to listen.
I agree.
Yeah,
That's
I think
great stuff.
It's fine. I did a little Facebook Live last night, and I asked that question to the people that tuned in. I said, what kind of things do you find are most important? What kind of things would you like to learn as a therapist? And it tends to be the common response you get is people want to learn basically how to communicate and listen better. At least for the people that follow us and listen to what we have to say, they are not looking for the new fancy technique. They're looking at, how do I interact better with the human in front of me? And I think it's like you said, it's a skill that's really hard, and it's something that, I think we should all strive to be the best at. Or as we
What's
said,
even harder, even harder is trying to get the message spread, because that's so tricky as well. Obviously, everyone who follows you, who was it? I think it was Nick from Massage and Fitness Magazine.
Oh, Nick Ing.
He put, I was going to try his last name, just to him. He put something on Twitter the other day saying, like, if you're not interested in evolving or something as a therapist, then you are. I need to put a line for people to fill in. So people are saying, oh, and I just put something down, which I hope wasn't too cynical. Like, I put, you're probably not reading this post, because it's so true. It's like we all put out these words of wisdom, but the only people who are reading them are people who are following us, and they're following us because they're on the same page as us. And that's the absurd thing about social media. And as an educator myself, I bang my head against the wall trying to think, this is why I love the chance to actually go on podcasts. I think it's quite a good way of doing it, especially if it's with somebody who you're not definitely on the same page as, which is ruined tonight because we're all on the same page. Yeah. But yeah, you got to somehow find a way of reaching out to people other than your followers. That's the challenge. And that's how the dissemination of information can speed up. And I don't think social media does really well at that. You're just talking to the converted all the time. And as soon as you try going to another group, then you get blocked or thrown out by one of the, it's tricky.
Yeah, those social media algorithms make sure that you're seeing the same people all the time. So you're even in an echo chamber of bias.
And you try and persuade your followers to spread the news, share it with your friends. I'm always very big on that, the Sports Therapy Association podcast, because like we have a regular kind of 80 or 90 who join us live, and that's great for live. In the UK, people have got far better things to do at 8 o'clock in the evening than watch something live. But they'll join us. But of course, yeah, they're all on the same page. And I say to the guests, like I said to you, everyone will just be nodding and going, yeah, you're right, you're right, you're right. But hopefully it's the people who download it who have got that kind of, that they're anonymous and they haven't got to worry about being people looking at them, who can just have a little listen in their own time. Hopefully they're the people who, will listen, and suddenly seeds will be planted and that will help them change. That's the power of podcasts, probably.
Yeah. I actually heard a quote a little while ago, and I can't exactly what it said verbatim, but it said something to the effect of, the people who are up front shouting are not who need you. It's the people who are quietly sitting in the back who really need your help. So it kind of goes in line with what you were just saying, those ones that maybe they don't have the gumption to maybe put something up, but they're listening to a podcast and they're quietly in the back taking information in and hopefully making a little bit of change. So, we got to be cognizant that hopefully we're helping all people, but helping those people that are quietly sitting in the back as well.
The lurkers are the ones you want to influence, the ones that don't engage, right? And I think that was our reason for our podcast. Anyway, it was just like, how, because Jamie and I both have, certain levels of social media following and email lists and stuff, but those are the people that have already bought into what we want to talk about and the things that are important to us. So it's easy to ask for feedback from them, and they'll tell you what you want to hear because they're already part of that group. But yeah, the podcast I think is a great thing when you look at the, how many people are downloading it and listening to it, and you think, these can't all be our followers. These got to be other people. So hopefully they're not scared, and hopefully they will, start asking questions, and maybe they'll start starting their own journey and spreading the knowledge, right? I think that's important. And what I found since like doing all these podcasts and stuff over the last year and connecting with therapists all over the world now, really, it seems like with COVID, it's given us this opportunity that we didn't really have before to connect with, people in the UK and Australia and New Zealand and all over the US and all over Canada, is that you can start to realize that there actually is a larger community of evidence-informed and I find that this having these opportunities gives an opportunity to realize that there's other people that are doing the same stuff, which is great. So you don't feel like you're alone, but also gives you a chance to, spread your message as well as they can spread their message to different parts of the world. I think it's really exciting.
Great. My internet just stalled there, so I'm hoping that recording still went fine.
Uh-oh.
Hopefully it was just me.
Said, so
yeah,
too bad.
We'll see. But it's funny, Matt, because coming on, I had all these ideas for running injuries and possible things to talk about. That. No, because actually I love the way this went, because it really comes down to the same thing that we preach all the time: is just treat the person in front of you.
It does, and it is. Even though I work with runners, I think it was Greg Lehman who I read in one of his early articles that said we have to learn to work with helping, curing people rather than curing running injuries. We're the ones that pathologize. It's people who walk in pain, not knees or ankles. So yeah, I do specialize with running in running injury performance, but the way I manage that population is using principles from modern pain science and trying to embrace all of that. That you have to be able to identify your own red flags and be able to know mistakes in their training and stuff. But ultimately, whatever sport people are from, I think the bigger thing is it's a person in front of you.
I think that is actually a brilliant way to end to this podcast.
I'm sorry if you tuned in looking for answers of, well, how should I be running? What shoes should I be wearing? What's the perfect cadence?
No, because I wasn't really expecting that specifically. I didn't want you to be like, everybody should be in minimalist shoes if they're running, but more just to talk about the therapy side. And then, it doesn't matter if you're treating a runner or a hockey player, an office worker, a lacrosse player, whatever. We're always about treating the person in front of us and finding out what's important to them and helping them get back to that activity that they love, whatever it may be.
It's a good message.
Perfect.
Too easy.
Yeah. So Matt, we can't thank you enough for coming on. And for anybody who's listening in who doesn't follow Matt, make sure that you do. Check out his website, runchatlive.com. Follow him on Instagram and Facebook, and also through the Sport Therapy Association podcast. Wealth of information coming from you all the time. And you're always popping up in my feed, when you're out sweating and running and doing this stuff. And just love what you're doing, and we can't thank you enough for being on. We appreciate you spending your time with us and sharing your message.
I really appreciate the invitation, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Cheers, Eric.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. These kind of topics are what we are all about. If you'd like to learn more, go to our websites,
themtdc.com or ericpurvis.com. If you know of any other therapists that could benefit from this, please tell them to subscribe.